You're all very welcome to our online conference today, Europe and the Future of Ireland's Ports, Coastal Communities and Maritime Sector. My name is Jonathan Evershed, and I am a postdoctoral research fellow based in the School of English at University College Cork, where I work as part of one of the projects that you're going to be hearing from later today, Ports Past and Present. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to what I think is going to be a really interesting set of discussions, bringing together a wide cross-section of stakeholders across sectors in Ireland and beyond, across academia, and indeed we have everyone or everything represented here today, from the natural sciences through to the social sciences, the arts and humanities. So a very wide spectrum of interests and perspectives on questions around the sea, the maritime, ports, port heritage, and so on. Business, government, all to discuss what I think and what we at the Irish Association for Contemporary European Studies think is an extremely important aspect of Ireland's relationship with the EU, particularly as we head into a post-Brexit and, dare I hope, post-COVID future. The connections across the sea are going to be all the more pivotal in those as we look to those horizons. So that's it from me for now, and I will be back with you after lunch. I'll be chairing the final roundtable and offering some concluding remarks later on in the day. In the meantime, if you want to send me any questions, you can do so via the chat function. And without any further ado, I will hand over to my colleague, Dr. Mary C. Murphy, Senior Lecturer in Government and Politics at University College Cork and the President of Iaces.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Jonathan, and a very warm welcome to all of the attendees today. We're delighted to welcome you to this Iaces event. It's been a difficult time for associations like ourselves in terms of hosting events during the pandemic period. So this is one of our first online attempts, and we're delighted to be bringing it to you today. So I'm coming to you from Cork, which of course has its own port here, but today the discussion is much wider, and we'll be looking at Europe and the future of Ireland's ports, coastal communities and the maritime sector. So before we start the event proper today, I'd like to just say a few words about the Irish Association for Contemporary European Studies, just to give you some context for the kind of work that we do and why we do it, and how we try to reach out to an audience within academia, but also beyond academia as well. And we're a professional association of mainly European studies scholars, but also practitioners, and we're drawn from across the island of Ireland. And the aim of the association is really about trying to foster collaboration between scholars, a reasonably small number of scholars, to try and source funding to support our activities, and also to disseminate the research that we do on the European Union, on European integration, and on Ireland's membership of the European Union. So we try to provide a forum for an informed and a detailed discussion about EU issues which are relevant to Ireland. The association itself has its roots back in the early 1970s, when Ireland first joined the European Union. And in fact, the inaugural president back then was former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, who was a key figure in what was then called the Irish Association for European Studies. So we're following in very big footsteps, it has to be said. But over the course of the last number of years, we've been convening conferences and events. Every year we have an annual lecture. Now, unfortunately, this year, our annual lecture has fallen victim to the coronavirus pandemic. And the speaker, we had lined up a very high profile speaker, has decided that he would prefer to come to Ireland next year to deliver the lecture in person. So we've postponed our lecture until probably April 2021. Every 2 years, we convene a high-profile one-day conference. We also organise smaller events, including today's event, and of course, we publish our academic work. We try to do that collaboratively with colleagues from across the island. And our last attempt was a special issue of Irish Political Studies, which looked at Ireland and EU crises. We also try to support and foster our younger colleagues. And we also try to contribute to public debate. through events like this, but also through our online blog series on the IAC's website. Our latest blog there is by my colleague actually at University College Cork, Dr. Andrew Cotty, looking at the implications of the election of President Biden for Ireland's relationship with the European Union. We're very fortunate as well, IACs, to have the support of the Erasmus Plus Jean Monnet programme. This year we received an award to support our activities from 2020 to 2023. And I'm delighted to say that today's event is also being supported by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Communicating Europe initiative. We're also trying to foster links with other European studies associations, and in particular, we've been working closely with our equivalent in the United Kingdom. And we're hoping to host a joint online seminar in the spring, which will be examining the impact of COVID-19 on the two states against the backdrop of Brexit. So today's event has been organised in light of it being a very substantial issue for Ireland, again, against the backdrop of Brexit, but one which really has not always had the attention it warrants and the attention that it deserves. During the process of the UK's withdrawal from the European Union, there was, of course, a very great deal of focus in the public debate on the issues confronting Ireland's border and Ireland's border communities. The port and maritime sector, however, and those borders were less discussed. And yet that really is a very key aspect of how Ireland's future relationship with the EU will be framed. So today's event really is about expanding the terms of the Brexit border debate to examine and to try and deepen our understanding of what is a key issue for Ireland and its future relationship with the EU. So we're looking specifically at the future of coastal and port communities, which at the end of the transition period, which is looming, will find themselves on a new frontier between the European Union and the UK. So we really are delighted today to be bringing together academics and experts and also stakeholders to look at these questions and to have this conversation. And we're trying to provide a forum where those kinds of issues confronting Ireland's port and coastal communities as a result of Brexit, but also other issues like climate change, and of course, the coronavirus pandemic can be discussed. So that's really about highlighting, I suppose, how responses to all of these challenges can be framed and can be influenced. So it promises to be a really fascinating discussion and also a very, very timely discussion, given all that's happening in Brussels right now and the prospect, we hope, of some class of a deal emerging within the next short period. Before we begin, I'd like to pay particular tribute to Dr. Jonathan Evershed, the Vice President of IACs. He really has been the main instigator of this event, and he's put in tremendous work behind the scenes in terms of bringing together this really stellar programme of contributors and discussion points. So today promises to be a really important day, I think, in terms of giving this issue greater public awareness and allowing conversations and discussions to develop. So I'm delighted on behalf of IACs to welcome you all here today, and I wish you all a good conference. We would much prefer to be having this, of course, in person, but that cannot be the case at the moment. Hopefully, this is the second best thing, and we can look forward to an interesting and important event during the rest of the day. So on that note, I'm going to kick off with our first panel of the day, and our first panel of the day is entitled "Confronting the Challenge of Brexit and COVID-19 in Ireland's Ports, Coastal Communities and the Maritime Sector." And I'm delighted to say that we have a really interesting mix of individuals who are going to contribute to this conversation. I'll be introducing you to 4 colleagues, and they'll be speaking for about 8 to 10 minutes each. And after that, then we'll go to discussions. We'll go to questions and answers from the floor. So please feel free to post your questions into the chat and to converse with us during that period. So I'll give you a brief introduction to each of the contributors first, and then we'll go straight to them. So our first contributor today is Ciarán O'Driscoll, and Ciarán is joined the European Movement Ireland in October 2019 as their policy and research officer. And Ciarán has extensive experience in EU policy tracking and research, and he's a recognised expert on the common fisheries policy here in Ireland. He's published work on how Brexit will impact Ireland's sea fisheries. Prior to joining European Movement Ireland, he was the Economic Research Officer at the Irish Maritime Development Office, and that also involved producing research on Brexit's impact on Ireland's use of the land bridge. And he also has a number of years lecturing and tutoring experience on the EU and politics at University College Dublin. We're also delighted to have Patrick Murphy, who's the CEO of the Irish South and West Fish Producers Organisation, a role he's held since 2016. Patrick also part owns with his family a private limited company which cultivates and sells mussels, and he's the director and part owner of an agri-services company. He has extensive community experience, a long-time community activist, including having been one of the founding members of Roaring Water Bay Mussel Fish Farmers Association. And that was an association which lobbied for and designed the first purpose-built piers in the Irish state. After Patrick, we'll be meeting Ben Radford, and Ben is the commercial manager at Rosslare Europort. He was previously the freight manager at Stena Line and commercial manager at Celtic Link Ferries. He has degrees in engineering and logistics, materials and supply chain management from the Dublin Institute of Technology, and a Master of Business from Carlow Institute of Technology. And then finally, our last speaker in this morning's panel is Seamus Leahy. And I'm sure Seamus Leahy may be a name that's well known to you. He's the policy manager for Logistics UK, which was formerly known as the Freight Transport Association in Northern Ireland. He's been a very vocal representative for the interests of over 18,000 members who are involved in all aspects of logistics and supply chains and transport. His work has brought him regular engagement with local and national government on a wide range of policy matters, including Brexit. And prior to working with Logistics UK, Seamus worked in the European and deep sea shipping industry, representing various shipping companies based in Belfast Port. So as you can see, we have a stellar group of participants in this morning's panel, drawn from a variety of different backgrounds, but each of whom will be able to give us a sense of the extent to which Ireland's ports, coastal communities and maritime sectors have been challenged by both Brexit and COVID-19. So I'm delighted now to hand the floor over to Ciarán O'Driscoll and invite him to talk to us. Good morning, Ciarán.
Good morning, Mary. Thanks so much for introducing us all today, and for our colleague Jonathan for the invitation to speak today. I've prepared some opening remarks, which I'll read from today, which will guide us all towards the next speaker. My brief opening remarks this morning will be kind of a broad brushstrokes of where sea fisheries sits historically within Irish society, and then I'll come to some points then about the common fisheries policy at the end. The theme of today's event is something very dear to me. Growing up in a fishing family in Castlesownbere with family in Bear Island, Cape Clear and Crookhaven, while the sea surrounds West Cork, it surrounds me just the same. And while that can be the case for Ireland, physically, mentally, I'm not so sure. What has always struck me, whether looking at sea fisheries from a policy or personal perspective, is that Ireland has always historically been disconnected with the sea, despite existing on an island. In my own view, Irish sea fisheries has always been an unfortunate victim of history. Under English and later British rule, the Irish sea fishing industry was deliberately kept at a point where it would not commercially threaten the British industry. Penal duties applied on the importation of salt into Ireland, for example, brought the practice of curing fish to a standstill in the 1700s. As a result of this and other actions, by about 1800, sea fisheries in Ireland was no longer seen as an industry and became more subsistence in practice that kept the fleet inshore and underdeveloped. We can still see the legacy of that today, where out of the 2,000 or so vessels in the Irish fishing fleet, about 75% of those are less than 10 metres in length. These restrictive actions by Britain, combined with the historical events during the 1800s, would mould the modern place of sea fisheries and the wider area of maritime in Ireland. Names like Davitt, O'Connell, Gladstone, Butt, Parnell, to the Landleap or to the trauma left behind by the Great Famine, ring loudly in Ireland's history books. And as a result, Ireland's collective memory and identity around was centred on our agricultural community, land and its ownership, and the political struggle of whether the soil beneath us would be in an independent Irish state. This narrative left little space for sea fisheries. Additionally, the people who relied on it at that time were from largely impoverished parts of the country, often remote and removed from the levers of power. Compared to that of those in agriculture, who were far more embedded into it or were positioned within it. And this was a reality that extended itself into the Irish state in the 20th century. In those initial decades after independence, Ireland was largely, as we know, an agrarian, a beer and biscuits economy, with sea fisheries eking out an existence in those decades from the 1920s to the 1950s. So is that on the eve of joining of what is now the EU, the industry has suffered from decades of neglect and critically a lack of understanding in its economic potential and social importance. While I will be pro-EU myself, for us to join at the time, we did sell the sea for the land, as is commonly said, or as one Irish minister involved in the negotiations at the time said to me once, we just had to let it go. And how could we not? So much of the reasoning to join was going to be to the great benefit of the agricultural community, which accounted for around 24% of all employed in Ireland at that time. Why would Ireland stay out of the EU for something that was not a realised part of our history or the economy? In a very tragic sense, Ireland really is an island nation with the outlook of one that is landlocked. While the benefits of Irish membership of the EU are numerous, the common fisheries policy has been that constant bitter pill that the Irish fishers have to swallow for the sake of our own membership. On one hand, Ireland is able to export some 70% in the value of our seafood to the EU single market. On the other, when it comes to quotas, from the point of fishers, do not reflect what should be attributed to what is in Irish waters. Again, these are arguments which many of you may find familiar in light of Brexit, but these have been grievances for decades for Irish fishers. And a factor of all these grievances is the over-centralisation of how EU decisions are made, such as quotas. It has been acknowledged that the CFP's one-size-fits-all approach has not worked in a club where the motto is united in diversity. While the outcome of whether fisheries will make or break the ongoing talks around Brexit, one of the challenges that the common fisheries policy will have to confront post-Brexit is the over-centralisation of its decision-making process, especially if we observe a UK fisheries policy develop on our doorstep that is more inclusive of fishers and other stakeholders in its decision-making process. While the EU treaties place fisheries as an exclusive competence, a shift towards a regionalisation of bringing the EU closer to those whom it impacts is a remedy that is needed for a policy which is blighted by a lack of trust. Indeed, trust is a wider issue of concern by citizens and how the EU reaches decisions. But opportunities exist ahead here in the upcoming Conference on the Future of Europe, where the EU will seek inputs and engagement from citizens about the future direction of the EU, a process which we at European Movement Ireland will be following closely when it is eventually launched. And those are my brief notes to open up today's event. I'll hand things back to you, Mary, and I look forward to the other speakers today and to the discussion to follow.
Great, thanks very much, Kieran. That was fascinating, particularly the historical context within which we need to understand the development and evolution of the port and maritime and sea fishing industry here in Ireland. So thank you for setting the scene. I think that's very useful for the speakers who follow you. Well, let me move on now to our second speaker this morning, Patrick Murphy. I have a brother called Patrick, which is probably no surprise. But in any case, Patrick, you're very welcome, and I'd invite you to speak now.
Thanks very much, Mary, and thanks Jonathan and Alan as well too for making sure that I could participate in this debate and discussion. It's most welcome. My bio, as it says, I'm involved in the industry since I was 8 years of age. To be honest, now I'm a little bit nervous after Kieran now to follow that. But just to bring you up to date on some of the history, when we joined the EU, we joined with England and we joined with Denmark, Treaty of Accession. But the difference is now, what's happening now is that when we joined, we were sharing our waters with the UK. We weren't sharing anywhere else. And the waters were determined by cannon shot, would you believe? So as far as a cannon can reach out into the sea, that was the jurisdiction of your state, which was 12 miles. And the Cod Wars, you might hear them mentioned and mentioned more, between Iceland and the UK, is that Iceland were one of the first to say, well, we want more. So they increased the waters, and you had two battleships from both countries steaming alongside each other, and always the threat of not only collision, but firing on each other. So we certainly don't want to go back to that, even though we have seen incidents in the Bay of Seine where France and the UK are continuously fighting over scallops, would you believe? So you're asking for the implications here, following on from Kieran and what he said. My father is from Hare Island, and so just to give some context on where we are with our fishing rights. He skippered a boat in Hoth in the 70s, and he had mostly a Hare Island crew. So they went out one week and they filled the boat with fish. And you'd say that's a great achievement. What's wrong with that? Unfortunately, so did all the rest of the boats. So the market was oversubscribed, but they weren't to know this. There was no mobile phones, or the communications weren't the best at those times. So anyway, they went out again, anxious as they were to fill the boat with fish again and come in. But unfortunately, when they reached the pier, the postmaster came down to them and he said, I've bad news for you lads. You're not getting paid for the fish you landed, and there's no guarantees that you're going to get paid for this boatload either. And so then here's the dilemma. You see, when the common fishery policy was designed, what they did was, very simply, and Spain wasn't included in this, they asked all the countries to monitor and record their catch data. And we were a country that didn't prosecute certain types of fish that were in abundance in our waters because we didn't have a homegrown market. We didn't have the infrastructure to send the fish out foreign, and we weren't a nomadic fleet. We didn't need to travel to other waters. So unfortunately, the game was rigged against us. So even though on top of that, agriculture got a greater say in the negotiations, as Kieran rightly pointed out, it wasn't the only reason. So we were on the losing end from the start. Now, as a fisherman and somebody that's involved in fishing all my life, I think Europe has been very good to this country, and our membership has been very good to this country. And saying that, if we left Europe in the morning, I wouldn't cry too many tears over the fishing rights, regardless of markets, right? But here's the dilemma. We're discussing now one of our partnership countries that will now, by their exit, make us an outermost state. And that's three very important words. We are cut off by land, sea, and air. So we would be in the same category as the likes of the Azores. And they have provisions and extra help given to them because they are now classified as an outermost region. Even though we are a full member of the European Union, I think that when we're talking to Europe about the future, because we have we can't put our stock or whatever into the back of a lorry or produce and just drive to the markets. The complications of what's ahead of us is unquantified yet. We have seen government agencies running around for the last number of months. And one of the greatest obstacles I see is health certs and catch certs for the products that we have, that veterinarians will sign off on either agricultural products or fishery products. And here's the thing, to give an example, watching it from the other side, from food being brought in from the UK to Ireland, I watched a programme where they discussed a pizza, for an example, and the different ingredients that made up that pizza. Will you require a health cert for every single one of those distinct food commodities on it? And we don't have the answers to those questions. So I'm just after leaving a Brexit focus group, or European Northwest Waters Advisory Group, to join yourselves, and got an update of what's actually happening. And the talks were suspended yesterday. I don't know if people are aware of that, and because of COVID. So again, the knock-on effects of COVID. And they're going to be virtual. But the problem is that, as you know, once a decision is made, it has to be implemented and ratified. And time is running out for that. So there are huge concerns in our industry is that come January the 1st, even regardless of quota share and access, will the provisions be made and the proper infrastructure be able to be put in place and ratified to be put in place so that we can continue seamlessly to continue the trade. And just imagine if we have thousands of lorries going to the continent, if there's a blockage, It's not as if you can park up the lorries and say, that's all right, we'll wait a couple of days. That doesn't happen. The logistics of this is crazy. Just a simple way of describing this. If a lorry goes to the continent, it comes back in 24 hours. If it gets delayed by 24 hours, that means you need to double the capacity of the lorries just to keep the previous flow going. So I have a map here alongside me. I don't know the camera, and this, if you can see this. So that's for us is what we're facing. The red is the English waters that are going to be completely taken out of the common fishery policy. And our greatest fear is that in our biologically sensitive area, we will see a massive introduction of vessels. So the easiest way that I describe this to people is using an analogy of football or any field sports. Whereas I grew up involved in sports, I thought it was brilliant, still do, and mentor kids and train kids. If you use a community pitch and you start off in the morning and you have 30 people playing on the pitch, GAA, and an hour later another team take the pitch, and an hour later another team take the pitch, the pitch and the grass will stand up to that hammering. But if you put the combined number of people onto the pitch in the same hour and a half or hour duration, it'll make mud of the pitch and it's gone. That's our fear for the biologically sensitive area around our shoreline. And would you believe it, this won't just affect Ireland, it'll affect everybody, including the UK. So if we kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, you'll be fighting over nothing. It'll be a lost resource. And wouldn't that be a pity? And just to give you one stat, in Ireland, since 2009, I started fishing in 1988, and we had to put our name down on a boat list to see if we could get a berth within the month. Well, in 2008 and 9, we had 280 vessels, and I'm only going back that far, so we don't go back too far. 280. We're down to 164 now. So Brexit, already we're being told there will have to be another decommissioning scheme. It's not just about taking out the boats, it's the amount of jobs that you lose in the area. So in Killybegs, GDP, 82% of economic activity is attributed to fishing. It's the driver for the economy. In Rossaville, it's 92%. And in Castletown Bay Royam, it's 86%. If you damage that, you're not just damaging fishermen. You're not just damaging your coastal communities. You're damaging a resource to the Irish country where people would like to come when they're fed up with the cities and they want to come out for a bit of fresh air. To be nice to meet somebody down there. So I'll finish with that, lads. And any questions people have, just fire them. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Patrick. And again, that's a really clear and concise overview, I suppose, of the challenges and dilemmas that the fisheries sector is facing. And I particularly like the football analogy. That's a very effective way of explaining a very difficult situation. And I suppose the timeliness of this event is underlined by some of your remarks in relation to us having a complete lack of detail in relation to the plans for how things will transpire at the end of the transition period. And it really is becoming an increasingly serious issue for what is admittedly a small industry, but nevertheless a critically important industry for ports and coastal communities. So thank you for setting the scene and helping us to appreciate the seriousness of the situation that the sector is facing right now. Well, we're going to move now from Castletown Bear. Castletown Bear is getting quite an airing this morning. A beautiful place, and we're moving east to Rosslare Port. So I'm delighted to welcome Ben Radford to today's discussion. Good morning, Ben, and I'd like to invite you to speak.
Good morning, all. Thank you very much. I'm going to actually try and present now. Just bear with me for one moment. I'm the only person that can share. Is it possible to share?
You can now.
Ah, perfect.
While we're setting that up, I suggest that we go to Seamus and then we can come back for
maybe
this
that's a
presentation.
good idea.
Okay. Okay, well, while Ben gets that sorted, we will move on to our fourth speaker this morning, Seamus Leahy from Logistics UK. Seamus, you're very welcome to this morning's discussion, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mary. And from the Miracle of Technology from Castletown there in Rosslare, I'm speaking to you from Belfast today, from the foothills of Cave Hill in lovely County Antrim. So yeah, I suppose very briefly about what I'm doing. I think Mary gave a very good overview there. We're Logistics UK. We're road, air, sea, rail even. Not so much in Northern Ireland. We haven't rolled out a freight train here in 25 years. But I suppose that there's two key changes on the horizon for us in terms of the ports, marine freight traffic. That probably just doesn't impact Northern Ireland, but the island as a whole. And obviously, number one is no surprise. It's Brexit, and that's probably in the long term. It's going to change our relationship. It's going to change Northern Ireland's relationship with GB and also with the rest of the EU. And to put that into context, last year on the Irish Sea, on ro-ro and ferry freight traffic, and this includes the whole island, there was just about 1.8 million freight units. So that includes basically, you know, Dublin, Rosslare, wherever, right up to Belfast, Larne, Warrenpoint. So that 1.8 million, out of that total figure, just over 850,000 of those units were between GB and Northern Ireland direct. So that equated to 46% of the Irish Sea freight traffic, which we're pretty much punching above our weight there, because when you consider Northern Ireland as a population of 1.8 million, I think yourselves just below 5 million, it shows our reliance on that GB trade. But that wasn't the whole picture, because then when we drill down into these figures, and the Northern Ireland Department for Economy have done some research, they've looked at Dublin. Dublin is huge for Northern Ireland with terms to getting goods into England, because the fastest way, and especially this applies to the just-in-time food sector, if you want to get your product out of a factory in Armagh to Marks and Spencer's distribution centre in London, the only way you can usually hit the timescales is Dublin, Holyhead. Going any other way, going to Liverpool is too long sailing time. It's an 8-hour ferry crossing, and then going up over the top to Cairnryan in Scotland, it's too long to travel, but also your drivers run out of their legal permissible hours to drive as well. So when the Department for Economy have done that recent study, they've worked out that 20% of the ferry traffic at Dublin, Holyhead is actually Northern Ireland trade. So when we look at that new figure, that actually changes the total figure on Irish Sea freight traffic, being just over 1 million units is GBNI trade. So that means basically Northern Ireland, we represent 37% of the population of the island, but in fact, we're responsible for 57% of the roll-on, roll-off freight traffic between the island and Great Britain. And that's mainly down just to, you know, we're part of the UK internal market. There's that reliance on retail. A lot of the high street brands in the UK have a presence in Belfast, Derry, Newry, but they may not have to the same extent in the Republic. I know that's changed in the last 20 years. But it shows as well manufacturers here have always, you know, their main focus has always been selling products to the GB market. And that's a situation that's evolved in the Republic. I think your markets have changed over the years, where you've looked further east to the European Union and also further west to the US, which is the biggest market. We've kind of stagnated a bit, and that's probably to our detriment in terms of Brexit. And probably one of the key arguments, you know, that I was using with the UK government the last couple of years, when we were talking about Brexit and we faced the potential of a hard border on the island and those barriers to trade, we were facing tariffs, checks, controls, and a lot of people, they looked at the plain trade figures between Northern Ireland and GB and says, listen, GB is your biggest market. What are you worried about the rest of the island? But between ourselves and other people like Intertrade Ireland, it worked out that cross-border freight traffic north-south, 70% of that is what's deemed intermediate products. So it's ingredients and components. And we're moving something like about 13,000 trucks a day across the border, which is a lot more than what moves across the Irish Sea. So when we actually looked at the figures, we thought to ourselves, well, if we have tariffs and controls on that trade between the EU and Northern Ireland, actually, we won't be able to make the products that we sell to GB anymore, or we'll price ourselves out of the market. We'll become too expensive because the ingredients we use to make that chicken and ham pie in a factory in Dungannon in County Tyrone, well, we get the ham from Limerick, we get the cream maybe from Monaghan, and the pastry from Dublin. We won't be able to sell the product to M&S and Waitrose at the same price we do today. And simply manufacturers in England, Wales, and Scotland will price us out of the market. So that's why the British government kind of changed tact in this, and they've seen this, and we've got to protect that all-island trade to, in essence, protect the Northern Ireland economy. So I think now with the Northern Ireland Protocol, we've been guaranteed unfettered access to the GB market, but obviously there's going to be controls coming the other way. Because in essence, when products are coming to Northern Ireland from January, they are entering the EU single market, and they will be treated the same way as if they're arriving into Dublin or Calais. And that's a penny it's yet to drop for a lot of business, especially in GB. Probably I've never been so busy in the last 2 weeks with inquiries about this, and it's mainly from big blue chip retailers and manufacturers in GB who are trying to get their head around the Northern Ireland Protocol. So we see basically we're going to have a friction now between GB and Northern Ireland in trade, but there's going to be no friction between EU Northern Ireland trade. So I've spoken to a lot of companies here, both in retail and manufacturing in Northern Ireland, who are now starting to look at their contingency plan as, do you know what, we get our products or ingredients from GB suppliers. Now we have to look to see, can we get the similar products from someone on the island of Ireland or further into the continental Europe? And I've even had logistics companies now are starting to get inquiries about people starting to change their supply chain, you know, where they may get their carrots from Lincolnshire, they may get them from Kildare instead next year, you know, where they get their sausages from England, they might come from Germany, you know, it's those types of things. And that will impact the port traffic coming here, because we might have more direct sailings, and we probably might have more Northern Ireland traffic using those direct sailings from the Republic of Ireland to continental Europe, and then more use maybe of just the GB land bridge as well. And probably the last thing I'll touch on, the change further down the line, it was very timely. Before I joined your meeting this morning, I was on a meeting with Sir Peter Hendy. Now, Sir Peter's been appointed by Boris Johnson in number 10 to lead the review on the union connectivity. So it's about how we connect England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And I joined that call. There's about 12 of us on the call on this, and just a general conversation before they put this out to consultation. But the point that they wanted to talk to me about was the bridge between Scotland and Northern Ireland. And we've all seen this story. And for obvious engineering aspects, the bridge is not possible, mainly due to there's nearly 1 million tons of munitions dumped by the Royal Navy between Northern Ireland and Scotland. And the sheer height, we would need to build pillars about 1,000 feet high just to get to sea level, and then another couple of 100 feet high to let deep sea shipping underneath. And it would probably wind it out. Anyone who knows the North Antrim coast would probably know the bridge should be very closed half the year as well. So Peter Hendy, he admitted, I said to him, listen, my message is, if you're going to build a bridge between Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's a bit like deciding to build a new conservatory onto your house, but your house is falling apart and the roof is leaking because the road infrastructure just isn't there. So that was acknowledged, but the key thing is that I think the pennies dropped that a bridge isn't feasible, but they do want to look at the potential for a tunnel. They see a tunnel maybe is about 5 miles longer than the Channel Tunnel, and that it wouldn't be open to road traffic. It would be strictly a rail tunnel connecting Scotland and Northern Ireland. They may speak to the Irish government to see if the Irish government are interested in this, and they're looking about maybe an electric train, just going between a 2-track. The one common problem I have is that the track configuration on the island of Ireland is different to GB. So what does the train do when it arrives in Antrim? You know, how does that? And simple things like that. But I think that's going to go into serious consultation. They have engineers that are going to look at it. It's going to cost billions, and I would just be worried about how the volumes of freight would stack up in the use of this. To me, I don't think it is feasible, but I said by all means, carry out your study and look at it. It certainly wouldn't be a death knell to marine port traffic between the island and GB anyway. You only have to look at the Eurotunnel between France and England. You know, ferries still sail, ships still move. But I think it's a pipe dream, to be honest, but I think it's something that they will do and they will look at and try and do costings for it, but I just don't think the figures stack up for that anyway. So that's my bit anyway, and hopefully you found that useful, and I look forward to some conversation around everything we've had this morning. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Seamus. Some fascinating insights there, I have to say. The tunnel in particular, we'll watch that one with interest. But really interesting to hear you as well speak to the complexity of the relationship between North and South, and then between Northern Ireland and the rest of GB in terms of traffic and transport. You know, I think a lot of the subtleties of that really were lost during the Brexit debate and even during the Brexit negotiations, and perhaps underappreciated by the British and Irish governments, maybe the British government more so, but nevertheless, you know, massive complexities which are very challenging to confront, and which also, you know, there's political undertones there as well, which add further to the difficulties facing your sector in particular. But good to hear as well that I suppose that there are sort of nuggets of opportunities there in terms of shifting supply chains, and there may be some capacity for exploiting those in the years ahead. So not an entirely negative message, I have to say. And if we get a tunnel out of it as well, well, how bad, I guess. But thanks very much, Seamus. That was fascinating, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to a lot of those points in the discussion. So we go now from Belfast, and we'll head to Rosslare again, and hopefully, Ben, you're able to share the presentation at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I just wanted to be introduced twice, I think, this morning, is the way I kind of get the impression. I think Alan is going to present the presentation from his side, and I'll do an overview of talk if that works for everyone. Let's wait for Alan to come in. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of Rosslare Europort, and just regarding, obviously, the master plan we have here in the port, where we are as a position in the port, and regarding Brexit and COVID. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So basically, we're predominantly a Ro-Ro RoPax port. We have a 15% share of the market here in the south. Our current customers are Irish Ferries, Stena, Brittany Ferries, and Neptune Lines. We have 4 sailings a day to the UK and up to 6 to the EU. We have 77 staff here in the port, and most of them are in the frontline operations that would have been working throughout the year, never stopping throughout the pandemic. We're 90 minutes on an ever-improving road network from Dublin, and we're a Tier 2 port. As you can see there, we've over 1,700 ship visits per year, 130,000 freight, 25,000 tonne of bulk, 21,500 trade cars, and just shy of 1 million passengers. We are looking to invest 30 million over the next 5 years at the port, and we're hoping for that figure to increase as well in the coming months to come. And you can see by the figures there, we are just predominantly a roll-on, roll-off rate. We don't really do a whole lot of container business. It's primarily just a roll-on, roll-off. The bulk is made up of fertilizer and timber, which I'll get into as well for you later on. You can move as well, please, on. Our current services are to Pembroke in the UK, Fishguard UK, Cherbourg in France, Bilbao in Spain, Roscoff in Belgium, and Zeebrugge in Belgium. Sorry, Roscoff in France and Zeebrugge in Belgium. Just on the right-hand side, you can actually see the existing routes are in green, but it's the red routes that we're obviously working quite hard at in terms of in the port as potential services directly to the UK from Ireland. I suppose with Brexit, Rosslare is in a very unique position because of the scenario is that's in Dublin, of congestion in Dublin, that may suit Rosslare as a potential fallback. And as I say, we currently have services into Cherbourg, Roscoff, and Bilbao at the moment, but there's been a lot of interest in recent weeks and months about Stena Line and Irish Ferries doing an additional rounds trip sailing every second week. But I think the market may require a bit more than one extra sailing every fortnight. But other operators are currently looking at potential direct services as well with ourselves. So that space is still to be ironed out. But as I say, we could have more good news due to come very shortly as well. I'll let you move again, Alan. So our strategy for the port, we had 3 different scenarios. 1 was more or less staying in the game, 2 was going for growth, and 3 was large scale investment. I suppose in the short to medium term, staying in the game was kind of just doing what we always done, which wasn't really promoting the port, wasn't really developing any new routes, and just looking after the existing customers. Going for growth is obviously investing into the port, which is the strategy we did go with, obviously to look after our customers, but to invest for larger ships coming in, because both Irish Ferries and Stena Line have invested heavily over recent years with new tonnage, new roll-on, roll-off ships, and the large-scale investment will be, it'd be a lot of money, nearly the price for that tunnel from Northern Ireland to Scotland, I think. So we're going for the middle strategy at the moment, is going for growth and the key scenarios around it. Alan, if you could take the next slide, please. So the middle plan really was we brought in a new management team, with new routes, new revenue, and new streams of offshore wind markets that we're looking at from the port point of view. So we're redesigning the berths, we're extending the berths. As I say, we're not necessarily deepening the berths in Rosslare, we're actually extending the berths because, as I said, Stena Line and Irish Ferries have invested heavily, but their ships have got longer and wider, but not necessarily deeper. So, and I suppose we've been looking at the trends for the next 3 to 5 and 7 years of what new tonnage is going to be built. I said Brittany Ferries and DFDS have also bringing out new vessels that are also wider and longer, but not necessarily deeper. So that's kind of, I suppose, giving us a different angle to look at it from a port point of view, because dredging is very expensive, and I suppose we're not the deepest port in the world, but from a roll-on, roll-off point of view, we fit the bill quite good. We're obviously looking at traffic management flows in and out of the port, looking to rely on EU funding for this as well, new terminal, smart gate systems. So basically a revamp of the whole port and bring it up to the technology that our customers and their customers are using, that we need to be in that position as well from a port point of view. I'll share these slides with everyone after, so if I don't cover all aspects of it, don't worry, you'll get an opportunity to read them. Just the next slide then as well. So the master plan itself is 30 million over the next 4 years. It's designed in conjunction with the footprint of the port. So what we're doing as the master plan of the port is not to interfere with the current day-to-day services that are currently happening, and especially with Brexit is only weeks away. So it's to work around that. So we do have different phases of the master plan. And again, this is all further in the presentation that she's going to have a read for any people who are very keen on the interest of the master plan as well. Just the next slide is actually the layout of the port. So as you can see here, this is the current footprint of the port, and I suppose we're not utilising all the space to the left-hand side past the trade cars. That space is not being utilised at the moment, and we have a very small customs section in the port that, due on the 1st of January this year, you will actually have outside of the port. So it will be the only port on the island of Ireland that will have the border inspection post outside the port. So it's roughly about 3/4 of a kilometre outside the port. The new trade facility is located. The facility costs about €40 million. So it's one of the most state-of-the-art developments of a border inspection post in anywhere in Europe. So it has the latest technology. I had a recent visit there during the week from the Department of Agriculture, the HSE, the guards, the customs themselves. The facilities they have really is impressive. But on the next slide, if I can show, you will see the very pale yellow right at the very front. Yeah, just a little bit down there. Yeah. That is the new border inspection post that will be moved into the port in the next 5 years. So we will actually have 2 border inspection posts in Rosslare, one outside the terminal or outside the port and one inside the port. But as you can see, there's a big development to the left, top left-hand corner of reclaiming land. So what we lose to the border inspection post moving into the port, we will actually gain in terms of new development of the port as well, by reclaiming land. You can see there we'll have new Lenten berths, we'll have new berths, we'll have possibly 3 new berths after this as well. So it puts us in a really strong position in Rosslare for attracting new business, as I say, the offshore side of things as well. Go to the next slide. So preparing for Brexit, I don't know if anyone can answer this question for me. I'm still trying to figure out how we prepare for Brexit. But I suppose we've been obviously liaising with a lot of the government bodies, as I said, Department of Agriculture, Customs, Guards, HSE, and in fairness, we've set up a really detailed traffic management plan here in the port. And I think the key element to take out of our position for Brexit on the first is you can discharge from the vessel here in Rosslare and you will not have the congestion of discharging, which I think other ports may have that issue, because there are border inspection posts is located outside the port. You will actually be able to leave the port grounds more or less instantly, which is really positive. Unless you are red trafficked, then you will have to go into the border inspection post. But as I said, that is 3/4 of a kilometre outside of the port. So anyone who's a green light can pass through the port very easily. And with the road from Wexford County Council are investing heavily, and they are looking to extend the M11 from Oilgate right to the port. And as part of the master plan with the port, we will actually have a new entrance into the port for freight only. And that will be dual lanes in and dual lanes out. So it will be straight out onto the motorway from the port. So the best way to describe it is your toll on the motorways. You come in, you pay your toll and you drive straight out. You come in, you check in and you drive straight out. That's the way it'll be the scenario in Rosslare in the next 4 years. The next one is just a COVID overview. I won't go into too much detail on this. It's just some of the procedures that were taking place. We just have a COVID plan in place in terms of the port, obviously liaising with the HSE guidelines. But the next slide is quite interesting, Alan. The impact of COVID has had a massive effect on the passengers and freight in and out of Rosslare so far this year. Our passenger market is down 91% across all sailings to the UK and the continent. We're a very uncertain future into the 2021, sorry, spell check there. Will the passenger figures ever return? We're not really sure. But the freight has also been heavily affected by the start of the year due to COVID-19. But we have seen a gradual return to the later stages of 2020. And that's probably due to the fact that markets are reopened under level 2 and level 5 restrictions. And as I said, some retailers have been able to stay open, which has been very important. But we've also seen a massive benefit to stockpiling for the freight figures for this year before the UK departs on the 31st of December. But that has a massive knock-on effect for the first quarter and possibly first half of 2021, because obviously markets and industries will try and recover from COVID-19 and Brexit, but it will also be trying to use up the stockpile that they're currently hedging on at the moment. So as good as it is as making up for the weak start of 2020, it could have a knock-on effect for 2021. So it's an interesting to see what way 2021 will work out for ourselves. So this is just my kind of overview of Rosslare Europort. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. That's me.
Many thanks for that, Ben. Again, another really interesting and fascinating account of Rosslare's situation, and it's very striking that the significance of Brexit for Rosslare and for the port, but by extension the knock-on effect for the rest of the economy and for society as a whole. I find that quite striking in terms of your presentation. I guess there's some reassurance there as well in terms of your readiness for what's coming in the next few weeks, which is reassuring. But it's just it's really a reminder of the extraordinary times that we live in. That Brexit and COVID-19 are forcing so much adaptation and so much change on all facets of society, and the ports really are at the front line in all of that.
Yeah, I suppose one of the scenarios will be bad enough on their own, but the two of them combined is having really a serious knock-on effect. And really, I suppose it's hard to give you a good demonstration of the benefits of the border inspection posts that we have outside Rosslare at the moment. And I can't express the joy of actually seeing this in first hand again on Monday, the sheer quality of the material they have and the facilities they have, and to how ready they are. They've gained over nearly 200 extra staff in preparation for this for the 1st of January, which is phenomenal that to have this in prepared already. And they've been here for the last 6 to 9 months, so they're well trained, well practiced. We've rehearsed a lot of things here in Rosslare from a traffic management point of view, with new road signs. We even have the guard prepared for the first quarter of next year, that if there is a congestion on the roads, we have traffic plans in place. So there is a huge detailed traffic plan gone into this. But just to take up your point on that, Mary, I suppose on a selfish point of view, the harder the Brexit is, and the more no deal Brexit there is, the benefit it is for possibly Rosslare. I know that suffocates everyone else in terms of the region and the country as a whole, but I suppose that's the kind of the swings. It benefits one. As I say, there's always winners and losers to every side of every war. I suppose that's the way we have to look at it, you know.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much for that, Ben. We have lots of questions coming in, so I might go to the questions and we can start to flesh those out. Let me see. Our first question is from Peter Long, and Peter's asking, why has the Port of Belfast not taken advantage of using rail container traffic to serve the whole of the island of Ireland? There are numerous financial incentives to achieve this. I wonder, is Seamus the man I should go to on this question first?
I'll give it a go, Mary. Yeah, it's something that's been looked at several times because, you know, when I used to work in shipping, I remember we used to spend a lot of time and money moving empty containers from Belfast down to Cork, for example. I remember used to a lot of milk powder used to go out of there, stuff for Nestle, I think. And we used to think a rail would make more sense for that. There was a study done up here with regards to rail freight, and the distance for it to break even, the goods have to move more than 300 kilometres. So internally in Northern Ireland, it's never going to work, rail freight. There used to be a very popular freight service between Dublin and Belfast, and that finished around 1994. And up until then, it used to move about 250,000 tonnes of freight a year. And most of that was Guinness and Harp beer, actually. But it was hugely popular. But the downfall of it was a benefit somewhere else. The huge improvements on the M1 north to Dundalk and then the A1 from Newry to Belfast. And that was basically the nail in the coffin of that rail freight, because it just didn't become economically viable anymore. Because in the old days, I'm young enough to remember, or old enough to remember, you know, going to Dublin and going through every hole in the hedge, you know, driving through Balbriggan, Drogheda, Dundalk, and now it's clean sailing. So I think the improved road network has killed it a bit, but I still think there's potential, like there, you know, with Ben, like down Rosslare and places, you know, with the connectivity with the ports, with moving maybe empty or laden equipment around the island, something to look at in the future, maybe.
Okay, thanks for that, Seamus. We have another question from Lisa Clare. Do any of the speakers have an insight on discussions regarding arrangements for fisheries in Northern Ireland after the end of the transition period? The protocol only applies to the land territory of Northern Ireland, with the UK-EU Joint Committee tasked with agreeing arrangements for the fishing industry before January the 31st. So I'm not sure. Patrick, would you have any insight?
Yeah, we've asked that question and we're actually waiting a response to that. As the question details, it's a different, you can move goods around internally in the state within the borders, but it's a different scenario on sea. And we're looking at two different control agencies, DEFRA and the SFPA. So the health certs have an impact there, and where the fish is caught, we're actually looking at a valid system that's been introduced recently that we feel in the industry is already causing problems on top of COVID and this, and we're scratching our heads, but we see a lot of regulations and changes to the fishing industry regardless going on. So it's not an easy task, I'd say. So the answer to that question is we're awaiting that question. There's no clarity there yet.
Mm-hmm. And Kieran, would you have anything to add to that?
I suppose the only thing I can think of would be that you know, fishermen in Northern Ireland will be able to benefit from the protocol, where they'll, you know, wherever they landed in Northern Ireland, they'll still be able to export it to the likes of the EU without any restrictions. So from what I can gather, they'd probably be at a bit of an advantage compared to their other kind of colleagues in like Scotland or Wales or England. So so I don't know if that might tempt some people to maybe could they set up businesses or change registration from like so Scotland to Northern Ireland, where the Northern Ireland will have that advantage where it won't have to deal with what the UK or with Great Britain will have to deal with now post the transition phase.
Okay.
Just to jump back in there, that would only apply to the UK boats. It wouldn't apply to the Irish vessels yet. And as I said, like there's only certain designated ports as well too. So they haven't identified whether other ports around the country will also be designated. And so it's like this. What our discussion was, our last one is, it's to see how this will actually happen. As Ben says, all the infrastructure is there. There's certain tests been carried out, but it's the actual implication after January and to see. And look, it's down to the individual personnel as well too, and how stringent people are going to be. Fish loads caught in different areas, different ICES areas as well too. Catch certs for all that implications hasn't been thought out yet. So we have vessels now registering with NIASC. It's for coastal states outside of the European Union and for certain stocks, but it doesn't include all stocks. So there's a lot to learn here yet and a lot to go through, but I feel myself that this won't be sorted out until well into the 2021. And it's just to keep going then. People keep their heads as far as I'm concerned. There has to be a little realism here. We can't be damaging our nearest neighbours and they shouldn't be looking to damage us either. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. Jonathan has his hand up. Jonathan, would you like to jump in?
I would. Yeah, and I'm modelling a behaviour that I hope others will join me in asking their question out loud, and again, kind of cultivating some more of that interactivity that would be great to see over the course of the day. But I have a very short comment, which is just that I found Kieran's historical setting very evocative, and I suppose by way of flagging some of the other conversations that are forthcoming over the day, that issue of Ireland's detachment from its seas, despite being an island, is something that I think is going to come back in further sessions today. So I suppose I'm just sort of flagging that I think that's going to be a theme that we're going to kind of try and tease out a little bit over the course of the day. But beyond that, I also have a question which I think is probably I'd be interested, I think, in all of the panelists' views on this, really, which is that it strikes me that in many respects, the infrastructure, whether we're talking about ports or fisheries, is there or is on its way to being there and ready to go for the 1st of January 2021 on the Irish side. And forgive me if I'm not being kind or generous, that doesn't seem to have been mirrored on the other side of the Irish Sea. And I have a specific question around that, which is there are, in my understanding and my research on this issue, such as in my investigations on this issue, such as they've been, is that there's some confusion about who is ultimately responsible for key infrastructural questions, be that the Westminster government or the devolved governments in Wales and Scotland. And I was wondering if what kind of engagement there's been, not only with Westminster, but also with Cardiff and Edinburgh in seeking answers to these questions. And has some of that infrastructural planning and development not been forthcoming on the other side of the Irish Sea, in part because it's kind of fallen through the gaps in devolution on the other side of the Irish Sea? And kind of more general reflections on, if anyone is to blame, where does the fault lie for that lack of preparation on the other side of the Irish Sea?
Thanks very much, Jonathan. You're actually echoing a question I had written in my notes here, which is along similar lines about, I was really curious while I was listening to all of you about the reception that you've had from respective governments, Irish and British governments, and also the devolved administrations as well, in terms of pursuing objectives and just explaining and allowing others to appreciate and understand the extent to which ports, the maritime sector and fisheries is impacted by all of this. So I might go around the panel on this one, and maybe Ben, I wonder, could I start with you? Would you have any anything?
Yeah, I suppose we've been liaising quite closely with obviously the port in Fishguard and Pembroke in particular. They're the ones that were obviously from a UK point of view with ourselves, but they have put in places in position, I should say, for border posts, but not to the same level. That's one thing we found, not to the same level as what we have from an Irish point of view. They seem to be allowing ourselves to do the majority of the work when discharging off the ship here. That's one thing we've noticed, because a lot of the operators, Stena Line and Irish Ferries, who service these two routes, they're finding we're way ahead in terms of preparation than the UK counterpart. That I think the investment that we've shown of 40 million alone in Rosslare for a temporary border inspection post kind of highlights that it's more of a concern on this side of the water than maybe on our UK counterparts, you know. So it has caused concern, but the UK ports have actually said to us that they feel that the most of the restrictions will be in Rosslare and Dublin, for instance. So that's what they feel, that, well, we should be putting more investment in on this side of the water rather than the other side. So it's still very interesting.
Sorry for interrupting. Do you share that view?
To a certain degree, because it's mostly to the Irish haulers, I suppose, that we're looking after, that, you know, that will be using the UK as a possible land bridge. And I suppose that's the reason for so much voicing out loud at the moment for direct services to avoid the UK, because there's 150,000 units a year that go past through the UK that don't stop in the UK to use the UK only as a land bridge. So the knock-on effect for them is time frame, just-in-time delivery, the cost infrastructure, the paper trail. So there's a lot to that. So that's why a lot of them are saying, well, look, if we have to go through the UK, we have to have everything sorted on this side. But I think it has to be credit to our transport companies here in Ireland. They've had so much time to look at it in terms of being Brexit ready. Because I know this has been on for so many years, and they've invested heavily themselves, the transport companies, not to mention the ports and the actual shipping companies, but the actual transport companies have invested heavily in staff to have NPM numbers all sorted. They know this so well. We only had a webinar on Wednesday, and we invited quite a good few of the transport industry companies around the Southeast region onto that call, and they were so prepared on this side, but there is the uncertainty of the unknown on the other side that awaits them, really. I think that's the biggest fear.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Ben. That's very interesting. I wonder, could I go to Seamus next?
Yeah, probably from 2 points of view, really. I think the devolved regions has a major impact on the preparedness with the UK side. Scotland, obviously the Transport Minister there, Michael Matheson, SNP, and they're basically, you know, you can sympathise, you know, they feel Brexit's been thrust onto them, they want no part of it, and they see it as a major inconvenience to them. With respect to Cairnryan Port specifically, and I've met Michael Matheson before, and he said, you know, he did not want to be inconvenienced or out of money because of something that Brexit was going to cause for them. So Cairnryan, there's not really been a lot, because what we fear there, if anyone's ever been in Cairnryan Port, outside of the actual terminals, there is nowhere to stack trucks. Now, there is a contingency plan. There's an old airport going back to World War II. It's about 5 miles away. Castle Kennedy is a place that they've highlighted as a place to stack trucks in worst case scenario. And as I said, basically the Scottish people I spoke yesterday is that, you know, that will only ever happen if the IT systems HMRC are building collapse on day one. There shouldn't be any problems on goods going to Northern Ireland if the IT system works. The big problems in Northern Ireland, we simply don't have the infrastructure in place. Nothing's been done. It's literally the construction tenders. We need border control posts in Belfast, Larne and Warren Point. The tenders for construction of those BCPs were awarded about a month ago, and nothing has happened on any of the sites. I think maybe a load of steel was dumped at the Larne site this week, and that's it. So they're meant to be ready for the 1st of January. There's not a chance that's going to happen. And that's come down, obviously, it's a devolved thing again. And there's been this, you know, the minister responsible for that, the DERA minister, who's our like agricultural minister, is a DUP minister, and it's extremely sensitive. Because to be seen to be a minister who's going to implement infrastructure, which is going to be a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, is extremely sensitive. And I think that's something that we all have to be kind of sensitive to. You know, I think as much as a hard border in the island of Ireland would offend nationalists, I think we have to be very sympathetic to the interests of unionist people as well. So I think basically, you know, in talks I've had with the ministers here in the department is that they have said those border control posts should be paid by London, and they stood firm in that. That's why they didn't start work earlier this year when we did see developments in Rosslare and Dublin. And London came up with the money, by £20 million. So work will probably due to begin, but the reason it hasn't begun is just this stance about, you know, who staffs it, who funds it, and ultimately what detail of checks will be required. So I would envisage work will begin soon when we see a free trade agreement between the UK and the EU, and then maybe some type of phased in implementation period for the first half of next year. So unfortunately, a lot of politics at play here with our state of readiness, and that's the mess where we are in now today.
Yeah, that really does speak to the political sensitivities of all of this for Northern Ireland. So it won't be ready on the 1st of January. So are you confident that there will be a capacity for a phased period of implementation?
I think there's going to have to be a period of grace. In talks that we've had with the EU, they're certainly sympathetic to a period of grace for food coming into Northern Ireland. And I was on a call with the Task Force UK last Thursday, and we had this like Chatham House call, and we talked about it, and they were very sympathetic to it. And then the next morning, Tony Connolly's on Twitter, basically outlining what we talked about. And I'm straight on the phone to a few people on the meeting to me saying, who's the snitch, you know, who's leaking this? It turned out the EU went to Tony with it, because the EU wanted to say to the UK, we're going to help you with this, with Northern Ireland, but you have to help us with something else elsewhere in the negotiations. So at the moment, there's this game of football between the EU and the UK, and unfortunately Northern Ireland, we're the football.
Gosh. Wow, Tony Connolly getting into all sorts of trouble. Patrick, would you have any contribution to this conversation?
Yeah, look, we don't deal with the regions and the infrastructure on the other states like that. Once the lorry has a seal on it, if it's going to Europe and it doesn't have to be opened or you're not breaking up the load, it'll go directly out there. There obviously will be difficulties if you have logistics where you have to take a pallet of fish off and drop it in the UK, maybe take on another pallet of a different commodity to lower the costs. No, our regions would be the Iaces advice and stock share, and that would be more, I'd say, complicated now to go into here, but just to give a quick, we have to comply with. There's no longer the way that you before, if you didn't have a quota, you dumped the fish. Now you have to bring in the fish, but all the fish has to be accounted for. There are catch limits placed on all the different stocks, and with climate change and fishing mortality and everything else. Each country takes an agreed share from the stocks, and that's why you see in the map behind me what we could lose out in an access into the UK, and they're claiming their sovereignty, and they're saying we can take as much fish as we can catch, basically because zonal attachment, the fish are here, they're ours, and we take them. But that has huge ramifications then for the rest of the fleets and what you can catch, because the ultimate aim from everybody is not to destroy the goose, as I said, that lays the golden egg. So I'm just going to give you another analogy, that the easiest way I can describe this. If you had two property developers and they bought a plot of land and they went into an architect and they designed buildings for that site, and say they could put in 40 houses, you know, and just before as the steel was dropped off on the site to start beginning the building process, one of them pulled out. So the second developer wouldn't say, well, you know, I have the plans, they're here, I'll carry on regardless, I'll just build smaller houses and I'll keep the 40 in my side of the fence. That is our difficulty, that we do not know is what's going to happen into the future. And that's why we've been adamant this, if you're going to have change, have no change. It's as simple as that, and then see as you move on. And look, there's arguments on both sides and historic rights and all the rest that I explained at the start. So they're the regions we're talking about, and there are other deciding factors outside of that, but it's very, very complicated.
And in terms of you, and in terms of your industry being ready insofar as you possibly can be for the 1st of January, has the Irish government been supportive, critical support in that?
Well, the organisations themselves, they went to Europe and they formed their own group. And look, we linked it to trade. If we were cut adrift from everybody else, the GDP that we do overall in the countries would mean that we'd be sacrificed. There'd be no doubts about that it's happened in the past. But in fairness, you know, it's one of the greatest flags that is being waved in the UK because it's only 0.05% of the GDP. But it's not that. It's the symbolism of claiming back their waters and getting back to something. And that's understood. But for me, as I said, the papers we produced and to show the biologically sensitive areas where the fish come to spawn and breed and the juveniles grow and get bigger, they move on. Fish move, and we have climate change to deal with. You know, fish move, change in water temperatures, change in spawning practices, fishing mortality, and we have the common fishery policy that is set on a plan that was drafted in 1970. Just think of this, and hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is the percentage. Just stay with the countries. If the fish stocks improve, you just give out a greater quantity. So I don't know, is there any business or any industry that has the same plan for the last 40 years or 45 years that hasn't been adapted or changed? And the result of that then is devastation for us in our country, as far as I'm concerned, in my lifetime. 4 decommissioning schemes, and people just told, listen, there's no room for you here, leave. So on COVID, we touched on this earlier on, our prices are down 50%. So the earnings. Now, the only thing somebody said, well, how can they stay in business? Luckily enough, there's been an embargo on paying back bills and debts. So boats are able to, and they're putting it on the long finger. But if it continues, I don't see a happy outcome, you know. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom either in these talks. We have a fantastic resource on for shoreline, and I think as time develops and populations grow, it'll be a resource that we'll be looking to more and more, and it's something we should protect. And the skill set of the people that are there. You don't train somebody in a classroom to go fishing in 6 months or something like that. This is something that is in you. And this is something like me, that I started fishing at 8 years of age with my father to get a taste for it. My son is actually in the industry now, but he was at it since he was 14 or 15 with me as well too. So it's that skill set, and it's unique, and it's precious. And I don't think we get enough credit for it, those fellas in the industry. It's a risky business, you know.
Yeah, no, and it speaks to the sort of the cultural impact of the sector on port communities as well, and losing that would really be regrettable, I think. Ciarán.
Yes, with this topic, the only thing I can think of is what we've kind of seen over the last while, maybe the UK side maybe not, you know, putting enough pep in their step in terms of like getting the ports ready and infrastructure and everything else. Well, as what Ben was saying, that yes, the Irish side has been much more prepared, and I can cite an example of this. Of when I was in the Irish Maritime Development Office, we had a roundtable session with Irish and French port officials, and one of the, you know, this is a way of like linking up, considering France is the closest EU member state now that we have. And one question was posed was that even despite Brexit, should there still be more connections between Ireland and France? And the question was from everyone on both sides was yes, of course, this still needs to be done. And you've seen that in Rosslare, there's those new ferry connections to Roscoff and elsewhere, which I know Ben can name. And then you've seen elsewhere where there's even that new connection recently with CLDN from Cork to Zeebrugge. So there are those potentials there, and Ireland, I think, is like trying to get around that. Get around the uncertainty that comes now with using the land bridge in some cases, where the status quo that was always there because the UK and Ireland were that shared that common membership of the EU. But now that that is there, we hope everything, of course, stays the same, because it's likes of the lads down in Castletownbere, the lorry it needs to get from Castletownbere to the continent as quick as possible. And that's where the land bridge does come into play for those kind of time-sensitive goods. So because of Ireland's, you know, peripherality to the continent, which is an ancient issue, we can go back years and decades and centuries about that. We're aware of our position geographically in Europe to be at the heart of Europe, and we're making those steps to kind of mitigate that, because Brexit is that challenge to us. particularly from anything from trade to fisheries. So we're definitely much more ahead, I think, mentally in terms of preparing for Brexit in some cases than the UK.
Thanks very much, Kieran. I'm going to move on to the next question, and it's a question from Catherine Hallett, and I don't think Catherine has her video on, so she may not want to ask the question. Catherine is based in the British Embassy, and she is a representative of the Welsh Government in Ireland. So Catherine, you're very welcome to today's event. I take it I should go ahead and ask your question on your behalf, unless you want to jump in. Well, Catherine, hi Catherine, how are you?
Hi, yes, I am here. Thanks very much for today. It's a really interesting discussion, and I think the conference programme is really, really important for us to look at this. There's so many things that connect us, and it's great to see the discussion going down to the responsibilities of government and so on, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. So we really very much appreciate that. So thanks to you and the panelists. For me, I just wanted to touch on the presentation, I think, by Ben on Rosslare port development. Now we're doing a lot of work in Wales on offshore wind development. So I'd be really interested to know in a bit more depth about that development and how they see perhaps the Celtic Sea being a real credible opportunity for joint economic development in the context of a green recovery.
That's for me to jump in there. Yeah, look, it's certainly thrown up a huge opportunity in terms for Rosslare Europort because of the Irish and Celtic Sea. I suppose being so exposed to the Atlantic Ocean, we do get the best elements for offshore energy. So it's a huge opportunity. Obviously, there's been a lot of investment required. The only port in the island of Ireland is actually Belfast that's able to accommodate for offshore energy. And I suppose from the south, I suppose there's no other port available really to have that infrastructure required for the level of offshore energy that is being asked. This is a 30-year program that they're looking at, and it has something like 30 to 40 billion euros worth of economic growth for Ireland if it's secured. But in terms of, there's several phases. Even the west coast of Ireland will also see a benefit in the future of floating offshore turbines. But we've had a lot of interest in Rosslare. I was trying to send a video to Alan, but it's just not processing for me. But I will hopefully try to share it with you, Alan, just to present to everyone. But I recently put up a drone that we have in the port of just the infrastructure we have. But we've been approached by a Dutch company called Excel Limited, and they put a hold on about 200 acres of land outside of the port, just primarily for offshore. This is they're looking to put in a business park just focusing on offshore energy. So that's huge in terms of from a Rosslare Europort point of view. But not only that, from an Irish point of view, that will produce enough electricity to obviously export back to mainland Europe. And I think that's what the main plan is, to obviously sell back the energy we produce, because we have more than enough excess of electricity on that, you know.
Great. Thanks very much, Ben. Patrick, would you like to join in?
Yeah, sorry, I'm muting myself and unmuting. As Ben said, there's opportunities for some people and disadvantages for others. And I'll just give my view on this on wind farms and energies. It reminds me of the Indians in America and the Aborigines in Australia, where the people came with their peaky hats and hunting turkeys at this time of the year with their big round guns. And they told the Indians, and they said, listen, how are things? Not too bad. Yeah, do you have any paper to say you own the land here? And no, Christ, we do. It's time for you to go. So I'd like to say that this is going to have a huge effect on the fishing industry as well in coastal communities, that it's not a positive for us. Now we are on the good side talking to, at last, to those at the start. And I was present at the Marine Spatial Planning and the drafting of that document, and I was grateful to be at it. So at least there's hope there. But save a thought for the poor fishermen now, with MPAs 30% and these wind farms coming in, and we have no rights according to the laws of the land to claim the areas that we're in, you know. But so it's not positive for the industry to see what's happening in the others, but we hopefully will be included in discussions because we have ideas of where it could be and where we could join together and make sure that it works. But again, this all ties into Brexit. If we are going to have decommissioning schemes, we would like to see a change in legislation and everything else to allow the fishing vessels to be designated as maybe guard vessels or supply ships to the wind farms. But we need to have this discussions, and again, the same with Ben there. We have to make room for these vessels. And the other point is we can't keep taking the rare resource people. As I said, you know, this takes years to learn the skill set of operating in a marine environment. And I think there'll be a fight over those people, just like we've seen in the oil in Scotland, where a lot of people left the fishing industry and were diverted to that industry. So please save a thought for the industry that is going to be most affected as well. And it's a perfect storm, I think, that's hitting the industry at the moment with COVID and Brexit and now wind farms and MPAs. And this is on the backdrop that we, even though we have a very bad reputation, do the most work with all the different various groups and advisory councils trying to create sustainable systems. And our vessels are changing their work practices, their nets and everything else to make sure they're adapting with the changing environment to catch the fish that they're entitled to catch. So I'm going to leave it there because I'll be on for the day and nobody else will get a chance if I keep going. Thanks very much for allowing me in on this.
Thanks, Patrick. Well, no, it's good to have all perspectives on the table on these very challenging questions. So we appreciate the input. I'm going to move now to Professor John O'Brennan, who is a member of the Irish Association for Contemporary European Studies, and John is based at Maynooth. John, welcome to this morning, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you to Iaces for hosting this event. It's been really, really interesting thus far. And obviously the urgency of it all runs through, I will run through, I think, every conversation. This question is possibly for Kieran because of his specialism. It is about the way the talks are going, to the extent that any of us really know. But there have been some suggestions that France was being more hardline than other member states on the future fisheries arrangements with the UK, but that it had been somewhat pulling back from that hardline position in recent days. And obviously, if they were to do so, it makes a deal potentially more doable, given that on the other side, there is this unfathomable attachment to a sector that contributes 0.12% of UK GDP, but nevertheless, it's got an emotional sort of resonance in Brexit communities. So I just wonder whether you might talk to us about that, and also how the talks where fisheries specifically are concerned are likely to go in the days that remain ahead. Thank you.
Oh God. I'm not sure how to answer all that. I suppose with, yes, in terms of France, they've been like particularly Macron has made it quite a big thing in terms of late. Again, he's looking towards 2022 when the French presidential election is taking place. So this is him kind of aligning himself up for that. But he's kind of the forefront of a very kind of solid group within the EU who are his position. Twice this year, in May and in October, EU fisheries ministers reiterated to Barnier to like stay the course, stay the line, keep what we've signed up to, and that I think was born out of, as the talks have been on, there was that question of like, should Brexit or should fisheries be compromised for the greater good and everything else. And also earlier in May, there were comments by Barnier of like possibly maybe a compromise could be found on fisheries, but fisheries ministers came right up then that time in May and in October again to say absolutely not stick to what was agreed. And what they would like him to follow through is the status quo, which is here, and what the UK wants, which is their own thing, which is leagues apart. And I don't know where this gulf can be filled, what will the compromise be, where it will happen. Because both are two immovable objects, and you have the concerns of the UK fisheries ministers to protect what is the case now, like in the case with for Ireland, where it's like, can Ireland continue to access mackerel off Scotland and everything else, but also the UK, in which, you know, is their right with that independent coastal state, as they have said time and time again, that they would like to do their own fisheries regime, and it's one which, like that, it's had a special attachment within the Brexit debate and referendum and everything else. I do remember reading during the referendum that I think in the UK economy, vets and private detectives contribute more to the UK economy than the fishing industry. But like that, as Patrick highlighted, in terms of like the local economy and the likes of Castlebeg, Killybegs, Rossaveel, it is the thing. We're not going to find a data center, or TikTok is not going to move there, or pharmaceutical companies not going to move to those kind of places. So while overall it doesn't contribute that much to the national economy, to the local, and to these are the reasons why these towns exist. It's important. So I'm heartened that even at this late date, that fisheries is still staying its course in terms of from the EU side. But I don't know what the compromise will be to make it work on both sides. There was some talks of a compromise of a derogation of tipping or kicking the can down the road, but I don't know how that will happen, considering the same issues would face then or what we're facing now. So to be honest, in short, I just don't know, and I'm anxious, like everyone else, to see what's going to happen with what's going to be published in terms of that deal for fisheries in the wider agreement.
Thanks very much, Kieran. And it's a great question, John, because I think it speaks to the fact that Brexit, we kind of see it within the prism of a UK-Irish challenge, but actually it's one which has implications for other member states, and it's one of which other member states have sort of a profound national interest as well, for sometimes inexplicable reasons, which are sometimes illogical and irrational relative to the size of particular industries, but very, very interesting. We're just approaching the end of our session, and it really has been fascinating, and certainly for me it's been a bit of a revelation in terms of the extraordinary complexities of the Brexit process for this particular sector. So enormous gratitude to all of the speakers for their contributions. But what I might do just to finish the session is I might ask each of the speakers just to very briefly indicate what maybe the main priority or the most immediate challenge facing the negotiators is at this very, very late stage in the negotiations. If you were to pick an issue relevant to your sector, which really does require being addressed at this late stage, what would your advice be to the negotiators as we approach the end game, and hopefully are on the brink of achieving some sort of deal in the next week or two? And maybe while we do that, we might spotlight Maya's work this morning. She's been doing some wonderful work gathering and collecting all of the remarks of the speakers and the contributions from the audience. It looks fantastic, Maya, it really does. But that might be helpful for the speakers as well in terms of just making a closing comment as we approach the end of this session. So I know it's a hard question, so I guess I'm just going to pick on someone to go first. Maybe Patrick?
Yeah, look, our industry, it's very simple for us. It's quota access and quota share. Getting into the grounds and how they're going to separate that. Look, this is an emotive industry. It's not just going to affect fishing, it'll affect transport. If the French, and they have declared this, will block ports, they will create chaos on the other side. The cod wars will be re-envisaged. So it's bigger than the sum of its parts. It's not just down to GDP, and it is a highly sensitive and political topic as well too. As I said, it's carrying way more weight in the European Union than people would have imagined, and especially when there's only 8 countries that are fighting over this, and we have an awful lot more that are not really concerned. So for the pressure to be applied, and the way that it is to be the one stopping block for what would be, I think, an agreement that would have been drafted long ago, it's huge, and that has to be dealt with first. And look, my viewpoint is this: if you can't look after the most vulnerable in your society, it doesn't bode well for your society. And I'm putting my hands up. We are one of the most downtrodden industries and one of the most vulnerable in all of this. So I think we should be looked after one way or the other. And it's a pity that it's been left to the last minute, but we've been always putting our hands up to say we're there. We'll meet at the table and we'll talk. But we are where we are. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. It's not just about the GDP. I think that might be the quote of the day in terms of your own sector. Kieran, could I go to you next?
Of course, it is a very difficult question to answer. It kind of ties into what I was speaking to John and what Patrick was saying there. And I'll focus on the issue of fisheries, is that the only way an agreement can come to pass is if there's compromise in this very knotted and complicated topic. So for the compromise, it has to be fair in terms of what the compromise would be and how it'll impact the likes of fishermen. So in terms of quotas or getting access to UK waters, that it's fair and it's balanced, and that it's not just Ireland taking the brunt of it, but it's shared equally across other member states. For me, that's the big thing, because I don't know unless Barney and Frost know in terms of what the compromise is actually going to look out, or is going to look like for fisheries, because that's the big knot that's going to prevent the deal from taking place. So whatever the compromise is, it has to be fair.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much, Kieran.
No problem at all.
Ben, over to you.
Yes, a bit like what Kieran's saying, a very difficult one to answer. Look, clarity is key. I think communication to the ground, because it's the people on the ground that's going to be heavily affected. Because every industry you talk to, that'll be pharmaceuticals to fresh products to the fishery guys, it's no clarification. That's the biggest problem. They're expecting everyone to be prepared, but they're not giving them the guidelines of what to be prepared to do. That's the biggest issue. And that's going to have the biggest knock-on effect from next year onwards as well. In terms of the government bodies, I think they are prepared on this side of the water. I think the ports and even the shipping lines are prepared to as best that they can. There will be certain things that won't be right or won't be in place come the 1st of January, but it's just for clarification and communication is key, I think, to everyone to understand where they need to position themselves as support. And it's a very difficult one, because there's so many elements of it that they're trying to get their heads around at the moment that could be a bit, actually feeding out the information could be the biggest concern.
Thanks very much, Ben. And I think that call to clarity is well received by the audience here today, for sure. Seamus, last word to you on this.
Probably just with us, supply chains don't change overnight. It will take a while for this change. I think what you might see you walk into a Tesco or Spar in Dublin today and compare it to the same store you walk into Belfast, there are differences in what you see in the shelves. I think you might see that differences becoming narrower and narrower over the years as supply chains become integrated on the island here. But the key thing is to make Brexit, and specifically to make the Northern Ireland Protocol work, that continuity of trade that we have today with Great Britain, there has to be a phased enforcement or implementation of that. And that's, the EU are aware of that, and the Irish government is certainly aware of that. So I think just a gradual change rather than a sudden overnight, the 1st of January, this huge change impacted on us, because it'll affect everything. We're used to in Northern Ireland, when we put on UTV at night, you'll see an ad for car insurance, and there's always the little asterisks at the bottom saying not available in the Channel Islands or Northern Ireland. And the fear is, and I've spoken to some big retailers, people like John Lewis, who don't even have stores in Northern Ireland, but they've come to me and they've said, listen, we're actually having to think about, do we suspend internet sales to Northern Irish customers after Christmas? Because we don't know how that's going to happen. So we're worried about consumers here being hard hit in the long run. So it's just about a bit of common sense. And the last point I would make, and we'll ask you to bear with us and give us your sympathies, because Brexit doesn't end for us. Mm-hmm. We have to go through Brexit every 4 years. It has to be ratified by the Northern Ireland Assembly. Mm-hmm. There will be a sham fight every 4 years, and we'll be stuck in the debate with this. So I feel like I'm going to be like Bill Murray in that film Groundhog Day, because it's going to keep running on and on, the debate.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much indeed, Seamus, and that message is certainly very well received, I will say.
Mayor, can I jump back in there? Because it's 4 years. It's every year for the fishing industry. We have to meet to decide what fishing rights will be given out every year. So it's every calendar year for the fishing industry that we'll be revisiting Brexit.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Thank you for that. Well, once again, thanks to all of our contributors this morning. I think the message we're left with at the end of this session is that this Brexit process has been tortuous and complex for the marine sector and for the coastal communities and for our ports and our transport sectors. And what's needed, even at this very late stage, is a greater degree of clarity, a sense of fairness, better communication, and for the protocol to be respected. And I suppose for us to be able to empathise with all of the different interests and what's at stake for them in this process. So again, enormous thanks to our 4 contributors. They really, you all really gave us, I think, enormous insight and did so with feeling, and we do appreciate that. So this brings our first session today to a close. Thank you all for joining us and for your questions. They really added, I think, to the richness of the discussion we've had this morning. And thanks to Maya as well for the tremendous work she's doing in terms of recording this visually for all of us. And we'll be using that to communicate today's event more widely after things conclude later today. So thanks again to our speakers. There's a break now for about 15 minutes before session 2 begins. So hopefully lots of you can join us for that. But in the meantime, a final word of thanks to our contributors, and we'll see you all again later. Thanks very much, everyone.